And with that, October is over with and our first spooky season month concludes. To be honest, I didn't read that many spooky books this past month, but I am going to run you through the 5 to 6 books I did read and what I thought of each of these. So welcome back to my channel, friends, or welcome if you're new here. As I just mentioned, I didn't read particularly spooky books for the month of October, but I did read a good few books, and some of which I really enjoyed, some I enjoyed a little bit less, and I was just going to run through them now in my monthly wrap up. I thought today's format could be in chronological order. So the first thing I finished in the month of October was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I should say I finally finished this book because, as you know, this is the first book in our classics read along, which I'll tag above. If you do want to check out that list, you can use that as a sort of guide to help you get into classics, which is exactly why me and a friend of mine came up with this list, because we wanted to get more into classics. So this was our first pick for the month of August. I didn't finish it in August, nor did I finish it in September. I finished it in October, and I actually really enjoyed this book a lot more this time around. I had read this before many years ago. The central theme wasn't lost on me, but I think I appreciated the effort to really kind of expose racial segregation and especially biased judgment and injustice, and how deeply rooted systemic racism is. I appreciated those themes a lot more because I have since learned a lot more about that. So to see that reflected in this novel was really good. I did, however, read an article which again changed my perspective on this a little bit, in which the author of the article discusses whether this book, although it is tackling racism, because it does take place in America during segregation, so we are kind of trying to tackle that divide, but I think the author of this article made a really good point in that we don't see any of these events from the perspective of a Black person. I think a lot of the Black people in this still fall into stereotypes. So we have our housekeeper who is sort of really almost like grateful in that, you know, the Finches treat her well. And I valued that dynamic and like how the relationship kind of evolves between Hal and Scout, but I do also feel as though she was too happy almost for what was happening around them, and then, like I said, there's no perspective from her, there's no perspective from the main character is accused of sexual assault. I think had we had chapters in between where it was actually their experience of it, I think it would have been way more impactful. But it is racism seen through a white lens almost, and although I really appreciate what this book was trying to do in 1960, I think looking back on it now, like, because we've learned so much, we can look at it and critique it for that. Although one thing I enjoyed a lot about this novel this time around was the sort of nostalgia it invoked. I think just in terms of childhood, like some of the superstitions that they had, some of the ways in which they saw their neighborhood, it was such a childlike view, and it really reminded me of being a kid and how I acted around my friends. I think that idea as well of being quite scared of everything and making monsters out of nothing. Like, you have this idea that Boo Radley is a deviant and he is almost like akin to a monster, and these kids build it up so much in their heads that they just become like utterly terrified of this person. And it reminded me a lot of how I was in a kid. Like, if we had a sort of strict neighbor, we would almost like I think like vilify them a little bit, and I just really liked that aspect of it. And I also really liked the relationship between Atticus and both Jem and Scout, because I just think the way in which they see their father and the way in which the rest of the town see their father and the man that he really is, and who we as a reader like see him as, is so vastly different. And I think we always think of our parents either as heroes or not heroes at all, and like it isn't one or the other. They're just human and they're just trying their best. But I really enjoyed this a lot more this time around. I settled on a 4-star for this. I did appreciate this novel, as I said. For its time, I think it was trying to really expose the injustice of that time in America. But I think it could have dug a little bit deeper, maybe. Moving on to my only 5-star read of October, it is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir, and I enjoyed this book so much. I think I enjoyed this even more than I anticipated. What I knew about this book going into it was that there was necromancy and that it was confusing, and my love for necromancy in books outweighed the fact that I was kind of terrified of reading this and just like totally not getting it. I did start this in September, finished in October, and I enjoyed it so much. I didn't find the plot especially confusing, but I think to try and summarize it is quite difficult. What I've kind of come up with is that we have 9 houses, each on a different planet. So this is very much a sort of weird horror space opera, if you will. But we have 9 different houses, all on different planets, and this is part of a religious order. Now, the 9th house, where Gideon grew up, is the keepers of the locked tomb, and Harrow, the heir to this house, to the 9th house, alongside 7 other heirs, go to the 1st house to compete for lectureship, which is very highly regarded and would do 9th house a lot of good if she were to be selected as a lector. Leading up to that event, which is essentially, we're assuming, like trials, which is again one of my favorite things in books, we see her cavalier run off. Now, a cavalier is basically like a bodyguard, and Gideon has to take his place and go with Harrow to 1st house. When we end up there, things just kind of go horribly wrong. It does turn into a bit of a horror, like a slasher feel to it. We do also have a murder mystery on our hands. There is a lot happening in this book, but I don't feel like it ever felt super overwhelming. There is definitely a lot of mystery in this book, but I think that is just purposeful. And I love when books bring up a lot of questions and you're not totally sure how this place came to be, but you kind of just need to accept that it is and move on with the story. I think Tamsyn puts a lot of faith in her readers in this book to kind of catch up as best they can. She doesn't like overly explain things, which I really like, and I think it fit the vibe of this book perfectly, because I think if you were to kind of try and dumb things down a lot, it would have fallen flat. So I really enjoyed the fact that it felt a little bit ambiguous almost. But again, for me, it was clear enough what was going on that I could follow along and just kind of put my questions on the back burner and hope that maybe one day we'll have those answers. And if not, then that's fine too. So I really mostly enjoyed Gideon and Harrow as a team, because I think their kind of back and forth is so clever, weirdly satisfying to read about them like insulting each other. I just really loved Gideon as well as a character. Hilarious character. I think This book was so much funnier than I thought it would be. And I just really love the humor as well, because it is very snarky. It is very sarcastic. It is kind of goofy in places, and I just really like that. I like that Gideon felt like very much like human. Like, she had moments where she seemed incredibly cool, and then moments where she's just a giant dork, and I just really love those kind of sides of her. I think it was really good characterization. In terms of prose in this book, it absolutely blew me away. This was probably the most unique writing I've ever read, in terms of just really like digging into the necromancy theme, and like even describing like hallways or buildings in a very anatomical way. There is, I think, one passage where it compares something to like airways in a better way than that. But I think I just love that it almost always came back to the main theme, which is necromancy in this book. I also loved Gideon's perspective, because Gideon is someone who grew up in Ninth House, where everything's kind of decrepit and everything's a bit like rotten and like gross, and she just sees the absolute beauty in that. And when she does come across somewhere that is maybe a little bit cleaner and a little bit more elegant, like she almost finds that like a little bit like jarring and repulsive, and like very much like gaudy and bright. And I just really like that she is this kind of creature of the night, if you will, and she just really loved seeing the beauty in like something that isn't necessarily beautiful. And I thought this was just such a unique perspective. I don't think I've ever read anything like this, where I was simultaneously blown away by the craft, but also just living for the story and for these characters. And the one thing I will say in terms of characters is that it is a large cast. There is a lot of people, and you very quickly need to get like on top of who everyone is, because again, like I said, Tamsyn seems to be an author who relies on her readers to kind of catch up as quickly as possible. She's not going to hold your hand throughout this novel. She is very much like handing this over and going, you figure it out. And I really like that. It did take me a minute to actually just get on top of the cast, but in my copy anyway, there is a character list at the very front, so you can always refer back to that and just kind of keep reminding yourself as you get used to this large cast. As I said, this is a 5-star. This is absolutely perfect. Like I cannot fault this book. Although there were plot twists that I kind of predicted, there were also a few that I did not see coming. What I always love about like a murder mystery element is that you just suspect everyone. You just end up thinking everyone is guilty of something. And in this book, I think that's kind of true. Like, I do feel like everyone does go off the rails just like a tiny bit. But yeah, I really enjoy this, and I honestly cannot wait to continue on with this series. There is a huge moment where I'm not sure how it's going to alter the course of book 2 and 3, but I'm really excited to find out. And yeah, this absolute gold. Like, I am so happy because I did invest in this series. I got the Illumicrate like special edition set, not having read this book, and I kept looking at them thinking they're really pretty, but what if I don't actually enjoy these books? Like, it might just feel like a waste of money. And having now read book 1, I am so relieved that I love this, and it is definitely something I'm going to keep coming back to. Definitely money well spent. Next up for my round robin, I read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This one I gave a 4.75. It was near perfect. I think the only thing that kept me from giving this 5 stars was just that I didn't particularly think that Oliver grew as a character at all. And I think partly that is the point of the novel, is that Oliver has to be a bit of a martyr throughout the book, but I think I would have liked to see him maybe change a little bit, because there were certainly traits that I did not enjoy, and I kind of wish that maybe he'd grow out of them. But still, I really enjoyed this. Now, as I said, this was part of my round robin, so this was my friend Frankie's pick. And yeah, I just really thought this was such a gripping novel. It is very much focused around Shakespeare, because it is this conservatory where they mainly focus on Shakespearean plays. So everything is a play, from like Romeo and Juliet to Hamlet to King Lear to whatever else there was that I cannot recall in that novel. So we are very much focused on Shakespeare, and as someone who hasn't read anything past Romeo and Juliet, because I took that at school and struggled with it so much that I was just permanently put off reading Shakespeare. But this novel, reading this, has actually like piqued my interest a bit. Like, I would maybe like to go back and read some of the plays. But yeah, I think even if you haven't read Shakespeare, you can still read this book. I will say possibly that you miss like the very nuanced parallels between Shakespeare and what is happening in the novel if you don't know Shakespeare. But I think some of them are kind of popular enough that you would be able to draw those parallels, or something we discuss enough throughout the book to still understand it. So I think the point I'm basically making is you don't need to be a massive Shakespeare fan to enjoy If We Were Villains. Now, this is, like I said, a group of students obsessed with Shakespeare, and they go to this conservatory where they board as well. And very quickly, we kind of see how the relationships work, what kind of role each of these kids take, and kind of where the problems lie within the group. We eventually see their own tragedy play out. And what I really loved about this book was the format, because I love any time we have an introduction from the narrator in the beginning, and he's basically sitting down with someone going, okay, I'm going to tell you my story, and then we launch into the story. That's what I love about Name of the Wind and the Kingkiller Chronicles, because I love that sort of storytelling. And it's the same in this. We meet Oliver, who has just served a 10-year prison sentence for murder, and he essentially sits down with his detective, who is now retired, and he tells him the full story of what really went down. I loved seeing these kids kind of unravel, as cruel as that sounds, but just seeing them kind of navigate the consequences of what happened and what they essentially did, and seeing all of that unfold. But as I said, I think I would have liked to see Oliver grow even just a little bit. I think some of his behaviors and some of his thinking I just didn't really like, I didn't really take to. And even though I was still rooting for Oliver as a character, I think having that growth and seeing him change, all of that slightly, would have been like a perfect book for me. But it was not meant to be, and I still really enjoyed this book. I saw some things coming, like I certainly had my suspicions on what was actually going down. I think having that confirmed was a really satisfying journey. And also, this book is such a page turner. It is so gripping that even if you do know what happens, like, you still want to read. It is very beautifully written. It is obviously quite like poetic, just to fit with the theme. The ending of this book is honestly chef's kiss. Like, it is one of 2 books now that I will forever remember, because I think the ending and the twist is just so insanely good that you cannot forget it. And the other book is Lifelike by J. Kristoff, because I just did not see that coming. And it was the same with this. Like, I really enjoyed it. I also really liked actually that it felt quite like ambiguous at the end. I think you can kind of just speculate on what comes after. But yeah, I really enjoyed this and would, as I said, recommend this, especially because this is a staple dark academia novel. Highly recommend it. Now onto a book that was slightly disappointing to me, Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Bearing in mind I still gave this a 3.75, so by no means an utter letdown, but I just think this book was extremely hyped and my expectations of it was so high, and I don't know, there were just some elements of it that I just didn't particularly like. Now, for one, the prose to me felt quite young, and I do know that this is a young adult novel, so please do not come at me, but sometimes you read YA and it does feel a little bit more grown up. It almost falls into that kind of new adult bracket, and I think with this as well, especially because it is a war novel, I just expected it to maybe feel a little bit more mature. And I think there was also a lot of, and then this happened kind of writing, where it almost felt a bit like it was just listing this person's day to day. And I just didn't, I think I didn't feel lost in the prose, which I really like when prose draws me in, and it almost feels so natural that you don't even think about the fact that it is written, you're just living the story. And I think with this I didn't get that. I was very aware of the fact that I was reading a piece of fictional writing that was just like telling me what was happening. So that was one thing that put me off slightly, and especially because I have heard such good things about is it something the Enchanted River? No. Oh, I'm not going to be able to think of the title, but another Rebecca Ross novel. I think people talk about how beautifully it's written, and so going into this, which is my first Rebecca Ross novel, I expected like really beautiful prose, and I think I just didn't really get that. There were a few lines in here that I really liked, but overall I think it maybe just missed the mark like a little bit. It's not badly written, please don't think that it is, but just felt a little bit young. And given the circumstances we're in and the plot to this book, Iris, our main character, I think came across really naive on the page, and I don't think she was. So I think that's maybe just a slight issue with how she was written and portrayed. Now, like I said, it's not bad, so please don't let me discourage you. I think it's maybe just not my type of writing that I really love and enjoy. The other thing that bothered me a little bit was the pacing. I did feel like it was quite slow. I do appreciate that this is romantasy and very much romance first. Like, this is a love story more than anything else. But given what was going on around them and the severity of this war, maybe there should have been a little bit of focus on the bigger picture instead of just the two of them. And saying that, I really loved Roman and Iris and the evolution of their relationship. I really liked it, and I was genuinely rooting for these two characters. And it's funny because as I was reading, I didn't particularly feel drawn in, but once I finished and I had left this book for about a week, I kept thinking about Roman and Iris, so I did really invest in them as characters. The rest of the cast, I think they could have been there or not been there, and it wouldn't have made much of a difference to me. I don't think I was massively drawn to the other characters. And then, as I said, the world building, given this premise is like extremely cool. We have these two warring gods, and they have essentially built their respective forces out of men, the people living in this world. A lot of like enchantments in this book as well, and I think that if all of that was explored more, I would have liked this a lot more as well. Even though I liked the little bit of world building that was in here, I think it could have done with a lot more. So little bit hit and miss for me. I can definitely see the appeal of this book, and I think it maybe just wasn't exactly the book for me, and that's totally fine. And in saying that, I'm still gonna read book 2 because I really want to know what happens next. The final thing I finished for the month of October was Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, and I was reading this as part of the Reading as Resistance movement over on TikTok. We are reading this up until the 4th of November because Adania is a Palestinian author who had won the Frankfurt Book Fair Prize and was essentially denied her award because the ceremony was cancelled because she is Palestinian. So we've been reading that, trying to raise awareness that this is happening and that she has been denied something she's worked really hard for and is really deserving of, just because she is Palestinian. And this basically follows 2 narratives. So the book is split down the middle. The first part is based on true events. Now, in the beginning of this novel, we see a Palestinian girl kidnapped, and what follows is honestly heartbreaking and really difficult to talk about. And the fact that this is a real life event is even more harrowing. The first half takes place, I think, almost immediately after the Nakba, which in 1940 something was when a ton of Palestinian Arab people were displaced. They did not have homes, they were driven out, they were killed, they were slaughtered. In what I believe was the beginning of the Israeli-Palestinian war. And then we see the second half of this narrative told from the perspective of an autistic Palestinian woman, I think 25 years later. She finds this story and becomes obsessed almost with this minor detail in the story, and she decides she is going to pursue this and find out what exactly went down. I found this novel incredibly difficult to get through. I don't think I can say I enjoyed it, but I was really impacted by it, and I really think it is such an important novella to read. This is essentially showing us that history keeps repeating itself and showing us that kind of vicious cycle of violence. There are so many parallels between the first half of the story and the second half of the story. It was beautifully written and translated into English. It's really impactful, the fact that this is 100 pages long, and it was just such an emotional journey reading this. It is a good starting point, even if you're looking to understand more about A, Nakba, B, the kind of turmoil of that country and of the Palestinian people, and really kind of understanding what the situation is in that country. And if you want to do it in a way that isn't like super factual, even though obviously the experience is very much what it is like to live in Palestine, I think you can kind of get lost in the fact that it's a novel a little bit more. So I think that this book is like a really good introduction, and then you can go on and read more about the history of this country, because obviously, even though it is very much at the forefront now, this has been in the making for a very long time. So I think it's important, if you want to learn more and understand more about the conflict there, that you maybe start with this, because as I said, it's so short as well that it's quite easy, well, not easy to read, but like a quick read, and then you can kind of go off and with that basic knowledge and then go and explore more. Can't say that I enjoyed this novel, but I was so moved by it, and find it really difficult to know that this is just ongoing and constant for Palestinian people. to live in such a oppressed and segregated country. Really important, I think, to read. Seeing almost exactly how history repeats itself is heartbreaking and insightful, and I thank Adania for writing this so that, you know, we can all kind of get a glimpse and a better understanding and more like sympathy and empathy. I am not counting this as part of October reading because I will be finishing it in November, but it is Mina and the Slayers by Amy McCaw. I did start this on the 30th, so I did read this on Halloween night, which was really fun because we have vampires, we have murder, we have like the slasher feel. But yeah, I will review this at the end of next month. So that concludes my reading for October. Not too many books read, but that is absolutely fine. As I said last month, I wanted to slow down a little bit and actually get back to genuinely enjoying what I'm reading instead of like chasing numbers or pages read. So I had a fairly good month, I'd say. I am looking forward to seeing what November brings. If you have read any of these books, let me know which one and what you thought of them. Similarly, if you are now interested in reading one of these, again, let me know which one in the comments. And as per usual, thank you so much for sticking it out with me. I appreciate your time and I hope to see you again soon.